Good morning and a very warm welcome to all of you. I know a lot of you, and it's really lovely to see you and to see people that I haven't met before. Just a word of introduction about Mark. I am so delighted you're here for a start. The reason Mark is here is because I went to a day that he was doing on Eckhart in London last year. And I was absolutely blown away by it, and I asked him on that day, would you come to Oxford? So here he is. Those of you who filled in the form will know that he is a well-known scholar of medieval theology. He's a translator, poet, teacher of religion and literature at the University of Applied Sciences in Bochum in Germany. There's so much more to him than that, though. I mean, his knowledge of Rilke was introduced to me last night, and it was just marvellous. And on that note, if you are interested in Rilke, Mark is doing a day, he's coming back to England in June, to the beginning of June. And there will be a day at the Meditative Centre in London on Rilke, entitled Songs of Rilke, Heartwork and the Art of Loving. So if you want to know more about that, I can certainly point you in the right direction to investigate and possibly make a booking. Mark is a joy to have, as I experienced together last night, because he engages, you will discover this for yourself, as a warm-hearted, genuine, authentic human being. And I'm very, very, very pleased to have him.
Good morning. And well, it's so wonderful to see so many of you here, some familiar faces from last night, and many new faces for me. Not for you, but for me. Let's begin, as is accustomed to this place, simply by taking a few minutes to settle ourselves, to ground ourselves, to find that spaciousness of heart and mind that we need to encounter the divine in us, around us, among us, beyond us. So let's begin with greater fashion, with stillness. Thank you. Breakthrough. Breakthrough. A word that was important to Eckhart, that I think captures something essential about his way of thinking, and thinking for him was crucially important. Because if we misunderstand the world we live in, we will never break through to the inner heart of that world. If we misunderstand ourselves, we will never break through to that inner ground that is our true self. if we misunderstand the world around us, our friends, our neighbors, the people we dislike, the people we're afraid of, we'll never break through to what binds us, what bonds us to each other. And that essentially is Eckhart's vision, that all that is begins with oneness and moves into multiplicity, into difference, into particularity. And the work of redemption is the gathering back of that world of which we are a part into that original primal oneness. That's the drama that our lives are part of, your life and mine. At every moment, our lives are a possibility of moving back toward oneness. And when we begin to see that, to understand it, to realize it, to experience it, something essential shifts in us. And that shift is what Eckhart often referred to as breaking through. Breaking through. I hope today will have a moment of breakthrough for you along the way. It won't all be breakthrough. It might be breakdown. It might be break apart. That would also be a good thing, as long as we're moving back into that oneness. And that's essentially the vision, the Neoplatonic vision that Eckhart inherited from an ancient pre-Christian Greek tradition that shaped so much of Christianity in the Middle Ages up until modernity and continued into our day. There are still Neoplatonists, Christians among us, and there are Neoplatonists who are not Christian. One of the remarkable things about the work I've been doing over years now with Eckhart is that Eckhart moves beyond Christianity without leaving Christianity behind. Buddhists, secularists, people find in Eckhart a vision that's essentially true. They may not be as interested in the Christian framework that Eckhart brings to that, and that's the challenge of Eckhart. Bring that kind of Neoplatonist vision of moving from oneness into diversity and back to oneness. His intellectual challenge was to bring that into conversation with Christian revelation. And he devoted his life to that and his passions to that. And he felt that the one way to do that was to startle people out of their complacence. I hope that will happen for all of us, for myself as well, today. Because we need to be startled out of our complacence. Every day we need that. Because complacence is a lazy way of moving toward violence and fear. And it takes a different kind of vigor to break through those temptations and find a deeper path that leads us toward oneing with all that is. So that's just a bit of the day. I'd like to briefly introduce Eckhart. For some of you, Eckhart will be familiar. You may be students of Eckhart. Some members of the Eckhart Society are here, I gather, and welcome to you. For others, you may have heard Eckhart. You may have a magnet on your refrigerator with an Eckhart quote. I think you sort of made it when you get to the magnet, the refrigerator magnet. It's funny because, I'm American, and if you go to any American household, refrigerators are covered with things. Germans don't put anything on their refrigerators. It's true. I don't understand what the problem is. In the sense of order, you just do not put things on the refrigerator. But goodness, you look at my house, maybe yours too. I gather you're chuckling. Perhaps it's so. No, but seriously, there are many quotes in Eckhart that are just astonishing, and that astonished people in his day so much that he was accused of heresy, which was a grave accusation. The only Dominican in the medieval period before up to his lifetime who was ever accused of heresy. He fought the accusation. We'll come back to that in a moment. And 28 propositions were among those declared as heretical or at least suspicious of heresy. And some of those might be on your refrigerator magnets. Because there's a way in which the startlement, he felt that the only way we would find find our way back to this essential oneness was through disrupting our conventional thinking, which was not wrong. Eckhart was not critical of the church as an impediment, but he knew that the church alone would not bring us back to that inner place of oneness. So we'll get to that in a moment. Here are some of those marvelous orientations for today. Examine yourself, and wherever you find yourself, then take leave of yourself. Not bad. This is part of a longer sermon. It's essential to Eckhart's thought that our self-projection, this is so counter-cultural in our culture. It's all about self-help, self-finding. If you want to make big money, publish a popular self-help book, and you'll make it for your life. Eckhart would have said this is deception, because it's not about finding the self, it's about losing the self you think you are to find the true self underneath, at the heart of your life. And we're never finished with that. It's not a one-time experience. So you discover that true self and you're on a golden road for the rest of your life. Not so. Each day we have to work at this. We have to train our mind. Eckhart would have been clear to say. Not simply train the feelings, train the emotions, but to shape the mind to be congruent with reality. A word that he actually coined in the German idiom of his day, Wirklichkeit. It didn't exist as a word, it simply means reality. Wirklich is what's real. And for Eckhart, Wirklichkeit is the reality of God working always in everything, all of the time, including your life and mine. Trying to bring it, trying to work it back to oneness. I mean, we in German, if you know a little German, it's a word you probably would have learned. Wirklichkeit. Common word. This means what's real. So for Eckhart, what's real depends upon the power, the energy of God, however we call that. And Eckhart would have said you have to get beyond God, take leave of God if you want to find God, abandon God if you want to have God, and abandon yourself if you want to find yourself. Here's a second. Start with yourself and then take leave of yourself. Examine yourself, and wherever you find yourself, then take leave of yourself. This is the best way of all. You should know that no one who has ever renounced themselves so much in this life that there was nothing left for themselves to renounce. Letting go. Letting go. Letting go. It's the heart of what brought Quakerism into the world. Letting go of dogmatic certainties to find the burning fire of God at the heart of the matter. At your heart. And our heart. Letting go. And we'll start with that today. We'll start with relinquishing. A word I love, just the sound of it. Just say that word quietly. Relinquish. Relinquish. It's a marvelous word. To relinquish comes from the Latin root. To relinquish is to let go, to unburden ourselves. And that is an essential task in finding out who we are. Eckhart would have said. How do we do that? Well, here's the staggering thing. The eye with which I see God is exactly the same eye with which God sees me. My eye and God's eye are one eye. One seeing, one knowing, one love. That'll be the theme for the whole day. One seeing, one knowing, one loving. And if you mention this to your priest, or maybe you are a priest, if you're a priest, you mention this to your congregation, they might suspect that you really need a vacation. That you need some time out. You need to detox somehow. What do you mean? My eye and God's eye a one eye. That's outrageous. And Eckhart would say, of course it is. God is that outrageous. The spiritual life is that outrageous. But we have to find this. We have to break through our ways of thinking, our ways of seeing, and yes, our ways of loving, to discover a quiet, a oneness that's been there all along. And that's Eckhart's path. I'm going to borrow a short film, it's 12 minutes long. It was produced by Anthony Finnerty of the Eckhart Society. It's brilliant. And I hope if you don't know the Eckhart Society, you'll get to know them. And you might want to acquire this DVD for yourself. It's remarkable. Let's just hear it. And I'll tell you a little bit then about Eckhart.
Die Meister des geistlichen Lebens sagen, die Seele habe drei Kräfte. Die erste Kraft sucht stets, was am süßesten ist. The masters of the spiritual life say that the soul has three powers. The first power always seeks what is sweetest. The second power always seeks what is highest. And the third power always seeks what is best. For the soul is so noble that it can rest nowhere but in her source. Behold, how sweet God's consolation is. so that all creatures seek it. And I shall say something further, namely, that the being and life of all creatures depend on their seeking God. Now you can ask, where is this God, whom all creatures seek, and from whom they have their being and life? I shall speak gladly about the Godhead, because all our happiness flows from it. I take a bowl of water, place a mirror in it, and set it under the sun's orb. The sun then casts its brightness out of its disk and out of its core, but still the sun is not diminished. The reflection in the mirror of the sun is like the sun within the sun, and yet the mirror is what it is. So it is with God. God is in the soul, with his nature, his being, and with his Godhead. And yet he is not the soul. The reflection in the soul of God is God. And yet the soul is what she is.
They're all excerpts from the sermons.
I see the lilies in the field, their brightness and their colour, and all their leaves. But I do not see their fragrance. Why? Because their fragrance is in me. All creatures are savoured by my outer self, as creatures, like wine and bread and meat. But my inner self savours things not as creatures, but as God's gift. But my inmost self savours them not as God's gift, but as eternity. From the first kind of love that God has, we can learn how his divine goodness compelled him to create all of creation. Creation with which he was eternally pregnant. And among all creatures, God does not love one more than any other. I declare that human beings should know and understand how noble being is. No creature is so small that it does not long for being. When caterpillars fall from trees, they crawl high on a wall in order to preserve their being. So noble is being. The final end of being is the darkness, or the unknowability of the hidden Godhead, which is the light that shines, but the darkness comprehended it not. That's why Moses said, "He who is has sent me. He who is without name, and is the denial of all names, and who has never been given a name." And that's why the prophet said, "You are truly a hidden God in the ground of the soul, where the ground of God and the ground of the soul are one ground. The more we seek you, the less we find you." We should love God as God is, as a non-God, a non-spirit, a non-person, a non-image, rather as a sheer, pure, transparent one, detached from all duality. And in that one, may we eternally sink from nothingness to nothingness. So help us, God. Amen.
sense of entering into the paradox of language, which is the paradox of being, which is the paradox of God, which is beyond the paradox. What Eckhart finally called the abyss, the great desert, where we see and know and love for the first time. Who was this man, this friar, this Dominican? Well, he was part of an emerging, new, relatively new order in Christendom, established at the turn of the 12th to the 13th centuries. Dominic, Francis, rough contemporaries, beginning a new movement, not monasteries, but communities of friars, of brothers, and quite immediately of sisters, who lived together in apostolic poverty. Francis devoting himself to the care of others, and Dominic cultivating the charism of the intellect to preach clearly and to live convincingly so that people might be drawn away from false thinking. It's hard to imagine how thrilling these two new movements really were. One of my old friends and colleagues in the United States has talked about the Franciscans as being the shaping of the Middle Ages. And in some ways that's true. But that's only partly true, because the Dominicans were the other dominant part. Not that the Benedictines, the Cistercians, all of the other orders were unimportant. But these were orders that were doing something different. They moved away from remote places into the cities and towns, both of them. They were mendicants, they were begging. They sought to live in poverty so that they could be free to do apostolic work of caring and of teaching. Eckhart was drawn as a young man to the Dominicans and probably entered, we don't even know exactly when he died or was born or when he died, 1260 approximately is his birth year, and he died sometime around 1328. We don't know exactly when or where. We don't have his bones. We don't have his grave. That's somehow appropriate, I think. That there's no one place to venerate this remarkable man. He once wrote, famously, in a talk he gave as a young prior, he was only in his mid to late 20s, of the community in Erfurt, which is where he entered the order in Erfurt in the former Eastern Germany. I was once asked, some people like to withdraw from company and prefer always to be alone. That is where they find peace when they enter a church. Is this the best thing? What do you think? What do you think? My answer was no. And this is the reason why. The person who is in the right state of mind is so regardless of where they are and who they are with. While those who are in the wrong state of mind will find this to be the case wherever they are and whomever they are with. Those who are rightly disposed truly have God with them. And whoever truly possesses God in the right way possesses God in all places, on the street, in any company, as well as in a church or a remote place, or in their cell, monastic cell. No one can obstruct such a person if only they possess God in the right way and possess God alone. Why is this so? This is the case because they possess God alone, intend God alone, and here comes a staggering thing, and all things become God for them. That's where Eckhart's teachings lead. It's not enough to possess God if you don't see that everything is God for you. Everything. Everything. The lost and neglected parts of your life, the despised parts of the lives of people around you, what confuses and annoys and distracts, that this also is God, Eckhart would say. If you learn to break through your misconceptions and your manifold projections. It's remarkable. Who was this man? He entered probably around 15 in Erfurt, a vibrant community already, in a town that was not a large city, but a considerable trading center in the northeastern part of Germany. There's an image of him on the town hall in Cologne, where he spent part of his adult life. This is a modern image. The town hall was destroyed by bombing raids in 1943. And there he is teaching, with a flame coming up at his feet, if you can see it, burning. Here's another image of him. Probably it's in a collection of writings, which includes his. A teacher with an open book and his eyes on his students. I'm always struck by that. If you can see it clearly, he's not really reading the book. He's reading his students' eyes, which is the only way to really teach. Right? Their books are open. Some are looking down. But you see, this one is looking right at Eckhart. There's this connection here. And this is what oneness means. I love this statue. Oops, let me get out of this mode here. This is a modern bronze in a Bavarian town, worth going to visit. This is Eckhart sitting with a sister. Who was she? She might have been a Dominican. She might have been a Beguine, because the Dominicans had a special charism, a special gift to care for the Beguines. I'll say more about that in a moment, who these women were. And what's so moving to me in this picture, if you see it then, if you look at the book itself that they're reading, this is, you see that here they are looking at a book together. This is what they're reading together. Each with a hand on the book. The most important is, die wichtigste Stunde ist immer die Gegenwart. The most important hour is always the present. The most significant person is always the one facing you. The most needed work is always love. And Bad Würgesholm, Germany. And I think that captures Eckhart's thought as clearly as any small summation could. The most important hour is always the present. It's the only reality we have. There is no other reality. Augustine already mused about this famously in the Confessions. He said, you know, I know what time is until you ask me what time it is, and then I don't know. But what I do know is that the past is the present which is no more. And the future is the present which is not yet. And all is the present. That's so utterly true. And at the heart of our spiritual longing is the yearning to find that out in moments in our lives. We can't shape our whole life around this. But to find moments along the way where we know this truth. Maybe it's seeing the first flowers rising from your winter garden, or hearing birdsong before dawn, or catching the eye of a stranger walking through the city of Oxford and connecting somehow, way beyond language, or touching the hand of someone in their last hours of life, whatever it might be, or utterly ordinary moments of a phone call or a memory, whatever. To capture the sense that all is now. And for God, all is now. All is now. There is no past in God. There is no future in God. God is present in all time. And if that's true, then the past is as redeemable as the future in the present. The past is as redeemable as the future in the present. A very wise friend going through a period of tremendous suffering once asked me a question I've never forgotten. He said, "Do you think we can change the past?" I never forgot the question. And I am slowly understanding what he was asking. Can we change the past? Yes, we can change the past. Through love, through forgiveness, through mercy. We can change the past. Because the past is not past in God. The past is present. And if we find that breakthrough in our life, to that realization, everything can happen. It's beautiful. This is the town Eckhart was from. This is a 15th century image of Erfurt. You see a walled city, magnificent then, surrounded with countryside, with a river flowing around the wall. It's now a busy international city, but there are still buildings that look just as they would have in Eckhart's day, the main cathedral. And over here, the Dominican church along the wall. Now a Protestant church, because it was the first church in Erfurt to follow the Reformation, to become a Protestant worship place. And here Eckhart would have entered the Dominicans, done his initial training from 15 on. From Erfurt, he was probably called to Cologne. We don't know for sure, but the great teacher, Albert the Great, Albertus Magnus, was still alive at this time. They certainly could have met, and probably did meet. Albert is buried in this church, and if you look behind it, if you've been to Cologne, this is the cathedral, you probably never got over to St. Andrew's. But if you've, any of you been to Cologne? Yeah, so you stop in the train, and you walk out of the train station, and there is this monstrosity of beauty right in front of you. And just in the shadows of that church, the great cathedral, which was small in Eckhart's day, it was just the front part, not the whole massive nave, was only built in the 19th century, is this small church, the Dominican Church of St. Andrews. There he would have been at several points in his life, perhaps for his, what we would think of as undergraduate, his liberal arts studies, and from there went to Paris and joined the community in what's called the Jacobin Church, the Church of St. James, because it was on the main path out of Paris, just across from Notre Dame, on the way toward, where is St. James? Santiago de Compostela. It was the main road of pilgrims. And it went right past this small Dominican community, which was ransacked, sadly, in the Revolution period and destroyed. He was twice in Paris, actually 3 times probably, as a student first, and called to return to Paris twice. First, he went back to Erfurt, was called to Paris as a professor of theology, a master of theology, went back to work in an administrative post, and was called back to Paris a second time, one of only 2 theologians for whom that was the case up until his lifetime. There was no such thing as tenure back then. Professors were assigned for a period of several years, at least in France, and then conducted their life in their own community. He went then to Strasbourg, to the Dominican Church. This is an old picture of it because it was burned down in the Franco-Prussian War in 1870, and with a shell eventually destroyed after that time. And probably there he was called there because of the conflict in the church with the Beguines, and to a certain extent the Guards. But the Beguines were the real problem. Women who were in a way uncontrolled. They didn't take lifelong vows. They lived communally. They lived, I mean, you could almost think of Virginia Woolf, a room of their own. It was that kind of vision, that we will establish a life not governed by the restrictions of monastic orders, but with the same disciplined spiritual life, of prayer together and of work together. If you've been to places where the béguinages still exist, Amsterdam has a beautiful béguinage. Bruges, perhaps the most famous of them, still existing. These enclosed communities where women lived together and kept a common life of prayer. Eckhart probably was there to help, teach, and to assure the church that these women would be given sound teaching. He was there, he ran into trouble and was eventually accused of heresy, first in Cologne, and when he was eventually tried and convicted as a heretic by a provincial action, he appealed well, not to Rome, because the papacy was not in Rome. The papacy was in Avignon during this time. He appealed to the Pope and was given a hearing to present and defend 28 theses from his writings, which he did do just before his death. This is the great papal palace then and now. It really hasn't changed considerably over the years. And it's here that Eckhart fought to defend himself and to declare that his thinking, while paradoxical, while startling, was indeed in line with Orthodox Christian teaching. He lost the case only after his death. Of the 28 theses that were presented, 11 were considered to be suspicious, and 17 were considered to be heretical.
Was he killed?
No. We don't know what happened to him. He probably died on the way back from Avignon to Cologne. We just don't know. He wasn't killed, as far as we know. Yeah. At the heart of Eckhart's thought, this will structure our day together. Our first session will end in 40 minutes or so, letting go Gelassenheit, the second session this morning, the inner spark, the Funktlein, the inner spark. And this afternoon, without why, Sonderwarum, or in modern German, ohne Warum. Letting go. Let me say just a word about this little book and how it happened, and we'll be using this afternoon, this spring afternoon, brief quotations from Eckhart, from the sermons, along with poems that John Sweeney and I wrote together, inspired by his writings. And if you've had a look at it, it begins, these are the poems by Meister Eckhart, the 14th century German mystic, philosopher, friar, priest, and theologian. There's only one problem. Eckhart never wrote poems. He didn't. But John and I, who've both been reading Eckhart most of our lives, adult lives at least, realize that Eckhart is incredibly complicated to read for those untrained in scholastic argument or untrained in the ways of medieval rhetoric and discourse. And most of us, if we turn to the sermons, it would be a short reading session, because we would find gems along the way, but lots that might just confuse or distract us. So John and I spent a long period of time together looking through the sermons, finding places, not like refrigerator magnets, but distilling moments from the sermons into very short, meditative poems. One of the early reviewers on Amazon.com complained. He said, I thought I was getting a book of meditations, and all I got was a book of poems. Where does one begin with this? He gave it a 1 star out of 5, so that's the worst. I think, Eckhart probably found that as amusing as I did, because in a way a poem is a meditation, of course. And Eckhart's sermons are meditative, poetic utterances, of course they are, although they're not formal poems. So these are what they are. If you want to check on us, in the back there is an appendix with all of the sources cited. So for each poem, there's a source that will tell you where you can find this. Here's one, God is Not a Cow. That's the title. Right? I mean, theologians could always use a little more humor than we often have. Eckhart had plenty of humor. Plenty of humor. Rich, we would call it. If you are one of those who expect to see God with your own two eyes, remember, God is not a cow. Now, come on. You can't like somebody who can say that. God is not a cow. There is no milk and cheese for you here. Nothing functional, nothing necessary that you need. When you make of God an object, wanting something, anything, God is not there. That's Eckhart. If you have a functional view of your faith, and you expect God to be a pragmatic provider, then expect to be profoundly disappointed. And you will be annoying to people around you. Because you'll be profoundly unhappy. And you'll be chasing one seminar to the next to find your way to that useful God that's going to somehow be an assistance to you. And Eckhart would say, well, there's nothing wrong with that, but there's really nothing right with it either. You will only have the little God you can manage. And that's honestly what many Christians of good faith have. They have the little God whom they can manage. And that little God is useful until something astonishing or tragic happens. And then they discard that little God and presume, with Dawkins and others, that there must be no God, when in fact they've only disproved the little God they thought they could manage. I find the whole discussions about, maybe they've tapered off here in Oxford or in Britain, but I remember seeing placards in the Tube by an atheist group protesting all kinds of things that I could only generally agree with as a person of faith. Of course that's not God. Of course that straw man, that cow, is not God. So, anyway, there's a lot of wit in Eckhart, and he uses wit, he uses humor to startle us out of our complacencies, as I suggested earlier. So, we'll spend the day looking at a couple of brief quotations from the sermons, and then seeing how the themes in those quotations carry the poems. So we'll practice a little bit with this now. And then we'll take a break about 11:40, 10-minute break, come back for a second session and see where it takes us. Letting go is, for Eckhart, the hard thing. And to let go is to become empty for him. You have to learn to empty yourself of everything you think you know, everything you think you want, and this is really important, everything you are sure you need. Because the little things you hold on to are like the cow that will perhaps give you milk and cheese, but will not bring you peace. And this is so counterintuitive to our culture, which is all about acquisition, which is all about consumption. I just say the word and it makes me cringe because it's just part of our life. You can't be even critical of it. It's the world that we have constructed. And it was being constructed in Eckhart's day. There was a massive economic boom happening in the 13th into the 14th century, the very time that he lived. Europe was awakening economically from a very difficult, long period, not of darkness so much as of poverty and disease. There were discoveries that were being made in what we would call the natural sciences, but even more importantly, in the agricultural sciences of how to till fields, how to manage cattle, all kinds of things that began to make life sustainable for more and more people. The cities began to grow again. Eckhart is part of the boom time. In some ways, it's not unlike, utterly different in character, but not unlike what we've been going through since the end of the Second World War in Europe and at least in the northern hemisphere countries. Perhaps we're at the end of that. Certainly is the case Eckhart sensed that things were unraveling in his day. But this theme of becoming empty, of becoming poor, of becoming naked, so central to Francis' teaching, preaching, and living, was at the heart of Eckhart's discovery as well, and of Dominicans in their own way, their own habitus, their own charism. Here is a quote from the Book of Divine Consolation. This is from the Davies edition, which I commend if you're looking for one little book of Eckhart's texts, Meister Eckhart's selected writings in the Penguin Classics series by Oliver Davies. Brilliant. Brilliant translation, brilliant short introduction, and brilliant collection. No barrel can hold two different fluids. If it is to contain wine, the water must be poured out so that the barrel is quite empty. You hear a biblical story here? The first sign in the Gospel of John. Eckhart is playing with this, obviously, in his mind. The wedding at Cana. If you wish to be filled with God and divine joy, then you must pour the creatures, the creaturely, out of yourself. As St. Augustine said, pour out so that you may be filled. Learn not to love in order that you may learn to love. Now that is a profound claim, which I would say psychologists, psychology in our own century, over the last century, has helped us understand the depth of. Turn away so that you may be turned toward. If anything is to be receptive, it must become empty. Possessing nothing, being naked, poor, and empty, transforms nature. Emptiness draws water uphill and causes many other miracles. I love this quote, this passage from the Book of Divine Consolation. Possessing nothing, being naked, poor, and empty, transforms nature. If you know a little about Dominican thought, about Thomas Aquinas, you'll sense a claim he makes at the very beginning of the great Summa of Theology, where he claims that grace does not destroy nature, it perfects nature. And so Eckhart here is continuing this Dominican claim of not seeing an antagonism between revelation and nature, between God and creation, but to see how the divine, in a sense, brings to fullness all that is in creation. And Eckhart would say, there is no creation. All is being created. Your life is being created today. No matter where you are in that life, young or old, sick or well, happy or sad, your life is each day being renewed as a creaturely entity. We know that now. The cells are reproducing themselves endlessly in our bodies. How much more is that an analogy of the soul for Eckhart? But this notion, if anything is to be receptive, it must become empty. There is the heart of it for Eckhart. You've experienced that on a very simple level. When you go to a friend and you want to tell them something, and all they do is talk at you. And you try to say it, and you realize they've heard nothing that you've said, because they're too full of their own exuberance, of their own experience, of their own need to be affirming, present, and whatever else it might be. That if you want to find God, create space. Create silence. Create emptiness in your life. Let go of as much as you think you can, and then let go of more. Eckhart would say that is the beginning and the end of the spiritual journey. Now, not of the Christian journey. He would have said that too, of course, but of the spiritual journey. To let go of everything we think we need and we know that we desire until we become so empty that something happens. Well, here are some musings on this, becoming emptiness. And I'm sorry if you have the book, I didn't write the page numbers down, but you'll be able to find it. Our work is simply this, to become the emptiness that can receive. That actually might be enough for the morning. Maybe we should just spend an hour just reflecting on that thing. Your work is simply this, to become the emptiness that can receive. It's so subversive as an idea. We don't think about becoming emptiness, do we? We think about filling up, tanking up, getting more, running from one good seminar on Eckhart to another. Here we are, and I'm happy we're here. No, it's not to dispute this issue, but the essential point is not to think about acquiring, but to think about letting go. Not to practice taking, but to become learned in relinquishing, in giving up, in letting go, in becoming naked, in becoming poor, and in becoming empty, or even emptiness. It's a wonderful thought. It is, I think, the essential charism of George Fox and of the early Quakers. In an age where there was endless talk, endless debate here in Oxford and throughout Europe about the right way to know God, the right way to worship God. And Fox and others breathtakingly said, then shut up. Listen. Listen. Listen into the stillness. And create that stillness that you can listen into. It's not easy to do. That's why most of us are not very practiced at it. Our lives are so full of language and things. And goodness, when I look at my young students, they're overwhelmed. They're just overwhelmed. I see it. When I get to know them, even 19, like the undergraduates here in Oxford or in any city, modern city, they carry in their hands an instrument of such enormous power, their smartphone, that connects them with billions and billions and billions of cosmoi, of realities, of worlds. It was so much easier, not that long ago, really. Yeah. Thank you, that was well done. Our work is simply this, to become the emptiness that can receive, like the thirst that brings us to the well. What a lovely image, Eckhart. Like the dryness that causes water to run uphill, and become simple enough to receive the one who is nothing, and empty enough to hunger for the nothing that is God.
Could I interrupt for a second? Is this from...
It is in the book. Yeah, it is in the book. All of the poems that you'll see are in this little book. Our work is simply this, to become the emptiness that can receive. I mean, in a way, this is so elemental to the spiritual life that Eckhart continued to say it over and over again his whole life. His whole life. Variations on these themes remained central to his preaching throughout his whole life, because he knew that this was difficult. It wasn't complicated, but it was difficult. And there's an important distinction. It's not easy to learn to empty yourself. If you think it is, then you've never tried. Right? Or if someone you know thinks that it's easy, they've never really tried. They've never really sat for more than 30 seconds in silent meditation, which can be marvelous, but in between is agonizing. Just as if you ask a musician, an accomplished concert pianist, how they learned to do what they do, they would say it began with learning the scales. And it continues every day with learning the scales, practicing them over and over again. Right? Every great athlete would say the same thing. You don't become an expert cricketer. Cricketer? Yeah.
It's not baseball bat.
No, or baseball player. That's another thing. You don't become that overnight. You don't become it by willing it, by wishing it. You become it by practicing. And by letting go of everything else and focusing on that one gift that you have. That one gift. A friend of mine, a poet here in Oxford, we met yesterday afternoon, and he showed me a little clip. Is he here, Edward? He didn't make it. Edward, the clip of your son.
Yeah.
I wish you could show it. 2.5 years old. He sounded like the beginning of a Scottish fiddler. Just standing there making sounds that were so beautiful. I was so moved by it. Maybe at the break you can show it to interested people. Edward Clark, a poet and a friend. Remarkable. So, anyway, in here we have that simple capillary image. Water running uphill, it will run uphill to dryness. It will be drawn up to dryness, just like the exercise you probably did in grade school with the celery stalk. Do you remember doing the celery? Did you have that? No. See, I think the English educational system is very impoverished because they didn't have what every American kid had, which is you learn the capillary action by putting food coloring into the bottom of a glass, and you put a stalk of celery in, and within 15 minutes, the color is all the way up to the top, right? Because osmosis, it moves to the place of less being there. And there's something essential about the Christian life that we've often, I think, missed in our rush toward filling ourselves. That essential to our life is empty. And this beautiful image, empty enough to hunger, for the nothing that is God, the no thing that is God. For Eckhart, if God was anything, God was an abyss. The divine abyss, he called it. The great desert. The God beyond God. The truth beyond truths. The being beyond being. Our work is simply this, to become the emptiness that can receive, like the thirst that brings us to the well. I can't help but think of this every time I read that line in Central in Eckhart. The sense of how important thirst is. You don't know that until you've been on a long walk and your water runs out. And you're in a dry place. Experts will tell us that within the next 20 or 30 years, the greatest human crisis will not be a lack of oil, but a lack of water in significant parts of the globe. Where there simply isn't enough water to sustain life. And often, tragically, where water is being diverted to produce crops for export, no longer used to sustain local communities. India exports massive amounts of rice from the United States because so much of the production, agricultural production, is moved over to glamour fruits for the United States and for the UK. know this: God can leave nothing empty. Neither God nor nature can tolerate emptiness in anything. Actually, at this point, the physical sciences have caught up with Eckhart. Therefore, if it seems to you at present that you cannot feel God's presence and that you are entirely empty of God, then this is not in fact the case. For if there's something empty beneath heaven, whatever it may be, large or small, heaven will draw it up to itself, or heaven will have to descend to it and fill it with itself. God, who is the master of nature, cannot tolerate emptiness in anything. Therefore, remain still and do not waver from this emptiness. For if you turn away from it, at this point, you shall never be able to find it again. It's a remarkable claim. An utterly remarkable claim from Sermon 25 in the Davies collection. God cannot tolerate emptiness in anything. So if you want to find God, empty yourself, and God cannot resist you. That's a remarkable claim. Empty yourself. Let go. Relinquish. Disburden yourself of what you thought you needed, which is not necessarily wrong or bad. Eckhart never would have said that. He never would have said stay away from church. But he did say, as we began the session this morning, if you think that that's the only place to find God, you'll never find God anywhere. Because you've managed that God. You've managed that God down to the size of your needs and the size of your desires. And God is not there in those needs and desires. Oh, this is clumsy metaphorical language. These are, in a way, poetic images. Of course. Eckhart said, of course. What else do we have? We have language. And we have silence. And for Eckhart, the use of language was essential, but not sufficient. It was essential, but not sufficient. It was essential to get us moving in the right direction. But sufficient language never could be. Because it cannot bring us to that abyss, which is the very being of oneness, of God, the divine, beyond God. And interestingly, we'll look at that after the break, the being of oneness in your life. Because that oneness is not simply in God. And Eckhart provocatively would say, our task is not to be united to God, with God. Our task is to become one with God. And God's task, as it were, is to become one in and through us. And when that begins to happen, then we begin to know and see and love God in everything. And when that happens, we are happy. And that is what we seek. To be joyful, to be full of that kind of freedom, that kind of union. Let's look at one more sermon. Oh, sorry. One more poem. Becoming. Same thing. Second version. So you want to find God? Empty yourself of everything. And you might say, if you're truthful, just as I would say the same thing, of everything, I can't let go of everything. I can't empty myself of everything. I have children. I have a job. I have rent to pay. I have things I am responsible for, people I care for. I can't let go of everything. I want to hold on to some things, which are really essential for me, that tell me who I am. I need those things. And Eckhart would say, well, do them, but let go of them. It doesn't mean flee responsibility. It means relinquish attachment. Relinquish attachment. And he uses this provocative phrase, we saw it in the first excerpt, that we have to move beyond creatures. But that Eckhart did not mean, could not have meant, abandon responsibilities to the creaturely world, which after all is where God is created, in every creature. Note the way I said that, that's Eckhart's notion. God is created all of the time, in all it is. So you want to find God, empty yourself of everything. Your worries and your hopes. Your wishes and your fears. For when you are finally empty, God will find you. Because God cannot tolerate emptiness and will come to fill you with God's self. Maybe, Georgie, we should just have done this one session and then just had silence for the rest of the day to be true to Eckhart and true to Quakerism, its place. Rest assured that's not going to happen. But I hope that you'll take this essential thought with you from this day, that practicing becoming empty is the heart of the spiritual life. And note I said, not the Christian life. It is that. The Christian life is one particular form of the spiritual life, but it's larger and truer and more necessary than the Christian path. Eckhart would have said, well, this is the path we have. This is the one path we have as Europeans in his time. He knew of other religions. He didn't know much about them, but he knew of them, of course. But how to bring this path, this Christian path, into congruence with this deeper spiritual vision was his task. And I think what we'll do is right now take a short break. So if you're thirsty, there's water, coffee and tea. Let's say 15-minute break. We'll come back at 20.